Welcome to today's deep dive into three seemingly ordinary dimes that could be hiding extraordinary value in your pocket change or collection. We're going beyond the usual suspects to explore three specific Roosevelt dimes from 1983, 2003, and 2004 that have caught the attention of serious collectors and have commanded surprising prices at auction. These aren't your typical rare coins that require a fortune to acquire, they're dimes that might be sitting in a jar, an old wallet, or that coin collection you started decades ago. Today, we'll uncover what makes these specific dimes so special, how to identify them, and why they've become sought-after pieces in the numismatic community. Let's start with the 1983 Roosevelt dime. Now, you might be thinking, a dime from 1983? That's not old enough to be valuable. But that's where many collectors miss out. The story of the 1983 dime begins with an interesting twist in U.S. mint operations. During this period, the mint was transitioning its production methods, and a small number of dimes were struck on copper-nickel-clad planchets intended for quarters, not dimes. These error coins, known as wrong planchet errors, created dimes that were slightly larger and heavier than they should have been. What makes this particularly fascinating is that these errors occurred during a time when quality control was supposed to be at its peak, making these mistakes all the more unusual and valuable to collectors. Identifying a 1983 dime with this error requires attention to detail. The most obvious giveaway is the weight. A standard Roosevelt dime should weigh exactly 2.27 grams, while those struck on quarter planchets weigh approximately 5.67 grams, more than double the expected weight. Visually, you might notice a slightly broader appearance, and sometimes the design elements don't quite align perfectly with the edge of the coin. The rim may appear thicker or more pronounced than on a standard dime. These identifying features are subtle, which explains why many of these have circulated for years without being noticed by the general public. The market value for these 1983 error dimes has seen remarkable growth over the past decade. In circulated condition, a genuine example can fetch between $500 and $1,000, depending on the degree of wear and visibility of the error characteristics. However, the real excitement comes with mint state specimens. In 2019, a PCGS-graded MS-67 example sold for an astounding $18,800 at auction, setting a record for this particular variety. More recently, in 2022, another high-grade specimen commanded over $15,000, demonstrating sustained interest from serious collectors. What's particularly interesting about these price points is that they represent a significant return on what was essentially a 10-cent mistake. One fascinating aspect of the 1983 dime story is how these errors managed to escape detection at the mint. The Philadelphia Mint, where most of these errors originated, was producing millions of dimes daily, and the mechanical systems that sorted coins by size and weight apparently missed these anomalies. Some numismatic experts speculate that a small batch of quarter planchets may have been mixed in with dime blanks intentionally or accidentally, and only a handful were actually struck before the error was discovered. This theory is supported by the fact that no significant quantity of these error coins has ever surfaced, suggesting that the mistake was caught relatively quickly in the production process. The condition-based value variations for the 1983 error dime are particularly pronounced. As mentioned, circulated examples typically bring $500 to $1,000, but even within this range, there are significant differences. A coin with only light wear, what collectors would call about uncirculated or AU, might command the upper end of this range, while one with heavy wear and reduced detail might struggle to reach $500. Once you move into mint state examples, the value escalates dramatically. A MS-60 to MS-63 example might sell for $2,000 to $4,000, while a gem MS-65 or better could easily reach five figures. The record-setting MS-67 example that sold for nearly $19,000 represents the pinnacle of condition for this error, with virtually no imperfections and full mint luster. What makes collecting these 1983 error dimes particularly appealing is the detective work involved. Unlike many valuable coins that were immediately recognized as rarities and set aside, these entered circulation and spent years in pockets, purses, and cash registers before their significance was understood. This means that theoretically, more examples could still be discovered today, hidden in plain sight among ordinary pocket change. This possibility keeps dedicated error hunters checking their change and visiting banks to search through wrapped dimes, hoping to find one of these valuable mistakes. The 1983 dime represents a perfect storm of factors that create numismatic value: a genuine mint error, limited surviving population, and growing collector interest. It's a reminder that valuable coins aren't always centuries-old relics or famous rarities. Sometimes they're modern mistakes that tell an interesting story about the minting process and capture the imagination of collectors who appreciate the human element in coin production. For those in our audience who might have started collecting coins in the 1980s or simply saved interesting change from that era, taking a closer look at any 1,983 dimes you might have could prove surprisingly rewarding. Our final featured coin takes us to 2004. A year that produced one of the most visually striking and scientifically fascinating Roosevelt dime errors, the missing clad layer. While the 1983 dime was defined by its wrong planchet and the 2003 by its dramatic die cracks, the 2004's story is one of what should have been there but wasn't. These dimes are missing one or both of their outer nickel layers, revealing the pure copper core beneath. It's not damage. It's a minting error that transforms an ordinary 10-cent piece into a captivating example of how complex the coin-making process truly is. The origin of the 2004 missing clad layer dime lies in the very heart of how modern U.S. coins are made. Since 1965, dimes and quarters, half dollars, have been clad, essentially a sandwich. A pure copper core is bonded between two outer layers of cupronickel, 75% copper, 25% nickel. This bonding process happens under immense heat and pressure before the coin blanks, or planchets, are even struck. For the 2004 dimes, primarily those minted in San Francisco, though Denver examples exist, something went wrong during this bonding stage. Either the nickel layer failed to adhere properly to the copper core in the first place, or it bonded but then delaminate, peeled away, before or during the striking process. The result? A dime that, instead of having its familiar silvery appearance, shows the warm, reddish-brown color of copper either entirely, if both layers are missing, or in distinct patches, if one layer is partially missing. These errors are particularly associated with the San Francisco Mint's mint mark, in 2004, suggesting a specific batch of improperly bonded planchets entered production there. Identifying a 2004 missing clad layer dime is usually straightforward once you know what to look for, though subtle partial delaminations can be tricky. The most obvious sign is color. Instead of the uniform silver gray of a normal clad dime, you'll see copper. If both outer layers are missing, the entire coin will be copper-colored, front and back. If only one layer is missing on one side, that side will be copper, while the other remains silver. Partial delaminations show distinct patches or streaks of copper interrupting the nickel surface. Crucially, examine the edge. A normal clad dime shows a distinct sandwich edge, a copper core visible between two silver layers. A dime missing a clad layer on one side will show copper extending fully to that edge. If both layers are missing, the edge will be solid copper. This edge examination is key to distinguishing a genuine mint error from a coin that was simply plated or chemically altered after leaving the mint. The copper core exposed by the missing clad layer should have the same texture and detail as the rest of the coin. It's not sitting on top of the design, it is the design surface. The market value for these 2004 errors reflects their visual appeal and the inherent fascination of the error itself. Because the error is so visually distinct, even heavily circulated examples command significant premiums. A well-circulated 2004 dime missing one clad layer typically sells in the $100 to $300 range. Examples missing both layers, especially those with strong copper color throughout, often reach $300 to $500 in circulated grades. The real excitement, as with our previous coins, comes with mint state specimens. A coin graded MS-65 or better, missing one clad layer, can easily sell for $800 to $1,500. A gem example missing both clad layers is exceptionally rare and desirable. In 2021, a PCGS-graded MS68 2004 S dime missing both clad layers, displaying pristine, full copper surfaces on both sides, sold at auction for a staggering $4,600. More recently, even MS66 examples missing both layers have consistently realized prices between $2,000 and $3,000. This demonstrates that collectors are willing to pay a substantial premium for both the rarity and the dramatic visual impact of this error. One particularly interesting aspect of the 2004 missing clad layer dimes is the science behind the failure. The bonding process for clad coinage is incredibly precise. The copper core and nickel layers are cleaned, heated, and passed through high-pressure rollers that literally force the metals together at an atomic level, creating a metallurgical bond. For this bond to fail completely on a planchet, leaving it entirely copper, or to delaminate so cleanly after bonding, points to a significant contamination issue, a problem with the rolling temperature or pressure, or possibly a flaw in the metal stock itself for that specific batch. Some numismatic researchers have suggested that a particular shipment of nickel-clad material destined for the San Francisco Mint in 2004 might have had an invisible coating or contamination that prevented proper adhesion. While the exact cause remains a subject of discussion among mint error specialists, what's clear is that it was a relatively isolated incident, explaining why these errors are scarce and highly sought after. They represent a tangible, visible failure in a process that works flawlessly billions of times a year. Condition is paramount for the 2004 missing clad layer dime, perhaps even more critically than for the 1983 or 2003 errors. Why? Because the exposed copper core is inherently more susceptible to environmental damage and toning than the hardy nickel-copper alloy. Copper oxidizes, developing spots, stains, or an overall dark, unattractive patina much more readily. A circulated example with heavy wear and dark, spotty copper surfaces might struggle to reach $100, even with the error clearly present. However, a circulated coin that has been well preserved, showing only light wear and retaining bright, reddish copper color, can easily command the upper end of the circulated range. In mint state, the difference is night and day. A MS60 coin with the missing clad layer but noticeable contact marks or spots might only bring $200 to $400. A MS63 with clean surfaces and good color jumps to $500 to $800. A true gem MS65 or better, with full, original mint luster on the copper surfaces, no distracting spots or stains, and razor-sharp details, is where the big money lies, easily $1,000 to $2,000 for a single side missing layer, and multiples of that for both sides missing. The record-setting MS68 example was essentially perfect. The copper surfaces were as bright and lustrous as the day they were struck, with no hint of the toning or spotting that plagues most copper-exposed errors. That level of preservation is exceptionally rare for this type of error. So there you have it, 3 Roosevelt dimes from the modern era, each telling a unique story of minting mishaps and transformed into valuable collectibles. The 1983, too heavy by nature of its wrong planchet, the 2003, scarred by the immense pressure that fractured its die, and the 2004, revealing its hidden copper heart when its outer layers failed to bond. These coins remind us that rarity and value aren't confined to centuries-old treasures. They can be found in the pocket change of our own lifetimes, waiting for a knowledgeable eye to recognize their significance. They represent the human element, the mechanical complexity, and the occasional, beautiful flaw inherent in mass production. Whether you're a seasoned error specialist or someone who simply saved interesting coins over the years, these dimes prove that extraordinary value can hide in the most ordinary places. Take another look in those old jars, those inherited collections, or even your pocket change today. You might just be holding a piece of numismatic history worth far more than you ever imagined. Happy hunting! Now, let's turn our attention to the 2003 Roosevelt dime, a coin that demonstrates how even recent minting issues can create significant value. While the 1983 dime's rarity came from being too heavy, the 2003 story revolves around something far more subtle yet visually striking: dramatic die cracks that transformed ordinary production into extraordinary collectibles. These aren't minor flaws we're talking about. We're examining coins where the die itself broke under the immense pressure of striking, leaving behind distinctive, often spiderweb-like patterns that collectors actively seek out. The origin of these 2003 die crack dimes lies in the demanding production schedules at the U.S. Mint facilities, particularly Philadelphia and Denver. By the early 2000s, the Mint was producing billions of coins annually to meet economic demands. Dies, the hardened steel stamps that impress the design onto blank planchets, have a finite lifespan. They're subjected to incredible force with each strike, tons of pressure repeatedly applied. Over time, this stress causes microscopic fractures to develop and propagate. Normally, dies are replaced long before these cracks become severe. However, in 2003, it appears that some dies were pushed beyond their intended service life, either due to oversight, production pressures, or simply a batch of dies that didn't meet the usual durability standards. When these compromised dies continued striking, the cracks widened and became visibly impressed onto the coins themselves, creating the dramatic error varieties we see today. Identifying a 2003 die crack dime requires a careful eye, but the features are unmistakable once you know what to look for. The most dramatic examples show cracks that extend from the rim deep into the design fields. Look closely at the obverse, particularly around Roosevelt's head, the lettering, and the date. Cracks might appear as raised, jagged lines cutting through these elements. On the reverse, examine the area around the torch, the olive branch, the oak branch, and the lettering, United States of America, and 1 dime. The most sought-after varieties feature cracks that form complete or partial circles around the rim, or those that create a cud, a raised, blob-like area where a piece of the die has actually broken away. These cuds are especially prized. Unlike the 1983 error, which you could feel with a scale, the 2003 die crack is a purely visual phenomenon, best seen under good lighting and possibly magnification. The cracks are raised on the coin, corresponding to recessed cracks in the die. The market for these 2003 die crack dimes has evolved significantly. Initially dismissed by some as mere damaged coins, sophisticated collectors now recognize them as fascinating examples of the minting process under stress. Values vary tremendously based on the prominence, location, and complexity of the crack. A minor, thin crack barely visible might add only a few dollars to a common dime. However, a coin featuring a major, bold rim-to-design crack, or especially a well-defined cud, commands substantial premiums. In circulated condition, a significant die crack example can easily fetch $50 to $200. The real excitement, though, lies in mint state specimens. In 2018, a spectacular 2003 P-dime graded MS-67 by PCGS, featuring a massive cud break on the reverse, sold at a heritage auction for an incredible $5,750. More recently, even less dramatic but still prominent die crack examples in MS-65 or better condition have consistently sold in the $500 to $1,500 range. This represents a phenomenal return for a coin that entered circulation worth just 10 cents. One particularly intriguing story surrounding the 2003 die crack dimes involves how they were initially discovered. Unlike many rarities found by dedicated error hunters early on, many of the most significant 2003 die cracks surfaced years later. Collectors who had saved rolls of dimes from that year, perhaps for their silver content, which Roosevelt dimes haven't had since 1964, but some still save modern rolls, or simply out of habit, began examining them more closely as error collecting gained popularity online. Forums and social media groups dedicated to mint errors started sharing images, and suddenly, collectors realized these weren't just random damage, they were distinct, catalogable varieties emerging from specific die states. This grassroots discovery process, fueled by the internet, transformed these coins from curiosities into established collectibles almost overnight. It's a modern example of how collector communities can identify and define new varieties. Condition plays an absolutely critical role in valuing 2003 die crack dimes, perhaps even more so than with the 1983 error. Why? Because the die crack itself is a form of damage caused by the minting process. Collectors want to see the crack clearly and dramatically, but they also want the coin itself to be in pristine condition otherwise. A heavily circulated coin with a prominent crack might still be valuable, but where can obscure the sharpness of the crack's details? In mint state, the crack stands out in stark relief against the brilliant, unblemished fields. A MS-60 coin with a minor crack might only be worth $20 to $50. Jump to MS-63 with a good crack, and you're looking at $100 to $300. A gem MS-65 with a bold, well-defined crack. That's where you enter the $300 to $800 territory. The record-setting MS-67 with the massive cut represents the absolute pinnacle, flawless surfaces, full luster, and a dramatic, visually stunning error that tells the story perfectly. The contrast between the perfection of the coin and the violence of the die break is what makes it so desirable. What makes collecting 2003 die crack dimes so engaging is the variety and the detective work. Each crack is unique. Some are thin and hairline, others are thick and jagged. Some run vertically through Roosevelt's portrait, others curve around the rim. Some are isolated, others form complex networks. Collectors often specialize in finding the most dramatic examples or specific types of cracks. It's like collecting snowflakes, no two are exactly alike, and the hunt for the most spectacular specimen is part of the thrill. Furthermore, because these errors occurred during regular production, it's entirely possible that more significant examples are still sitting unappreciated in collections, coin jars, or bank rolls. The possibility of discovery remains very real, adding an element of excitement to the search. For those of you who might have put aside rolls of dimes from the early 2000s, or who regularly check pocket change, taking a moment to really scrutinize any 2003 dimes could uncover a hidden gem worth hundreds, or even thousands, of dollars. It's a tangible piece of modern minting history, born from the immense pressure of production and preserved for collectors who appreciate the story etched in steel.